Well, we want to read from Mark's Gospel, chapter 5. We're doing this little series called Moments with Jesus. One of the important things is to recognize that Jesus' mission on earth was to come and to seek and save those that were lost. He said this mission was not to be served, but to serve and lay down his life as a ransom for many. And in his mission to get to the cross, what he was doing was meeting individuals, training 12 disciples. I actually think that the whole of life of Jesus was training 12 disciples. Even when he was speaking to thousands and feeding thousands and dealing with individuals, he was actually training 12 because they were going to go on and change the world. And I want to make sure that when we look at this, Jesus spends time with lots of different individuals along the way. And we're looking at one of today, the woman who reached out and touched the hem of Jesus' garment. We're going to read from Mark chapter 5, verse 21 we'll start. When Jesus had crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue rulers named Jairus came there, and seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." And immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, and he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciple answered, "and you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. And then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, go in peace and be freed from your suffering." May God bless to us this morning the preaching of his holy and infallible word. Mark 5 is one of those chapters, it's brimming with impossible cases. If you know this chapter, it's one of those places where you've got hopeless cases, people who are just impossible situations. The beginning of it, there's this demonic man, the other side of the lake, then we have this diseased woman, and then we're going to deal with this dead girl. The whole chapter is around these kind of impossible cases. They're impossible for people then, they'd be impossible in one sense for now. Because, if you look at it, the demonic man would have been sent to some kind of institution. This diseased woman would probably be built in some terminal care unit, and of course the dead girl wouldn't have been remembered, she'd just be packed off to be buried. And yet when you move through this chapter, what you see is that Jesus makes a difference. Nothing is impossible for Jesus. This chapter is full of impossible cases, but when Jesus is there, nothing is impossible. Mark 5, you discover that Jesus is adequate for every situation. There are no incurables. And today I want us to just consider this case of the diseased woman, and next week we're going to look at the dead girl. And in a way, this portion of Scripture is a parenthesis. Now, a parenthesis is just a posh way of saying it's in brackets. It's a little portion of time or an action that's kind of bracketed off. So if you can imagine, here's Jesus, he's on his way to Jairus' house, and there's this other incident that happens on the way. And we're going to get to the on the way next week. So it's a parenthesis, there's a bracket of time. In fact, if Jesus hadn't bothered with this woman, the girl probably wouldn't have died. But the news comes that she is dead. But we're going to look at that next week anyway. So this parenthesis. And in fact, every healing and miracle of Jesus is a parenthesis, a bracket in time of Jesus' whole mission. His mission is to go to the cross. He set himself to go to the cross. So in a way, everything is just a bracket of something else, an interruption maybe, on the way to achieve that. Sharing with Kira and Joe on Monday in our staff meeting, it's actually the interruptions that make real ministry. We plan something, but something else happens. Do we have the eyes to see and the heart to reach out when there's an interruption to say, oh, you're messing up my plans? Or actually do we see it that actually God has a plan here and we need to be ready to minister into it? So you may have thought that tomorrow you're going to do X, Y, and Z, and you start off with X, but something else happens. Are you ready to be there for God? To be his person? To be his ambassador? His minister on the spot? See, Jesus was planning to go to Jairus' house, but something else happens. On that particular day, a crowd pressed into him. And in that crowd was this weak, timid, dying lady who just reached out and touched Jesus. And when she did, her life was transformed. And there are those in churches throughout this land who need to do exactly what she did. To reach out and touch Jesus. Now she touched him physically in a sense. He's here by his Spirit. We reach out and touch him spiritually. We call on his name. And he will come. And he will meet our needs. Are there people here today who that's exactly what you need to do? You need to have this transformation. My old church, we used to sing that old thing, "Pass me not, O gentle Saviour." Did I sing that the other week? I did. It kind of been ringing in my head. Ray, you should come up and sing with me one day. Pass me not, O gentle Saviour. Hear my humble cry. While on others you are calling, do not pass me by. We used to sing that chorus, reach out and touch the Lord as he passes by. Do you know that one? Yeah, some of us are old, we can remember these things. There's those little choruses. Jesus is here by his Spirit. Are we going to reach out and touch him? Well, let's learn from this lady. I want to look at three particular things. I want to look at the horror that she endured, the hope that she embraced, and the healing that she experienced. So these youngsters writing those notes down, hope you've all got all three. But we'll come back to them. The horror she endured. Verse 25 and 27. Have we got those things on the... Yeah, we'll come back to the verses first. Tell us the symptoms. She was suffering from this bleeding. Literally, she was hemorrhaging. Now, whatever caused that bleeding, we don't know. We don't know exactly how it is. But what we do know is she was a very sick woman. And a constant flow of blood such as this would have caused untold kind of suffering. Can you imagine hemorrhaging for 12 years? It causes lots of different kind of suffering, and I've put a list there. It causes physical suffering. Constant loss of blood would have made you weak and pale and anemic, and I'm sure the doctors amongst us can tell us all sorts of other things that could happen to us. But you'd have no energy, you'd be worn out. And we're told that she tried all the remedies that the doctors of the day would want to give her. She had suffered under their care. Because in a way, they weren't real doctors, were they? They were quacks, that's what we call them. They just came up with everything. I did some research. I want to read to you from a rabbi, Rabbi Jochanan, if I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right. But here's some of the sort of superstitious remedies of the day for a woman who was bleeding. Take some gum of Alexandria, of alum and crocus hortensis. Let them be bruised together and given in wine to the woman that hath an issue of blood. But if this fails, that's going to be a recurring phrase. But if this fails, take some Persian onions, 9 of them, boil them in wine and give it to her to drink and say, arise from your flux. But if this fails, set her in a place where 2 paths meet and let her hold a cup of wine in her hand, and let someone creep up behind her and scare her and say, "Arise from your flux." But if this should do no good, take a handful of cumin and a handful of crocus and a handful of fenugreek, I don't know how to say that even, let these be boiled and given to her as a drink, and say, "Arise from your flux." But if this should also fail, and it goes on, you dig 7 ditches and burn some ashes of vine trees and sit her on it. This is the kind of remedies that they were given. And this woman, the indignity, you can imagine the indignity of having to go through all that, trying to find your healing. She suffered physically. She suffered socially. She couldn't get married because she would have been deemed as someone who was defiled and unclean, and she would have defiled her husband. If she was married, the husband would probably be forced to divorce her so that he wouldn't be in the situation of being defiled himself. She was not able to kind of work with other people. She was reduced in a way to a life of begging scraps from a distance, living on the fringes of society. She suffered emotionally. She'd been this way for 12 years. I've had a broken tooth. I'll tell you about my tooth. All right. Oh, it broken in half. It's caused me all sorts of. I'm getting it taken out on Thursday. It's been terrible. I know I'm a wimp. But when you've got a broken tooth and it hurt, and I've had to put up with this for a fortnight. Get your violin out for me, will you? Every mouthful is painful. But I can't imagine what it'd be like then to suffer with something for 12 years. And you've tried everything. You are emotionally drained. She was living in that kind of way without seeing any progress. From one level of rejection to another, just lonely, isolated, desperate. She suffered religiously. You look back in Leviticus chapter 15, you find out how she was considered as an unclean woman, and anything or anyone she touched also was going to be considered unclean. And the result is that she couldn't mingle with other people in public. She shouldn't have been amongst that crowd. She shouldn't go to the temple. She wasn't even allowed into the outer courts, the women-only places, let alone anywhere else. She suffered financially. We're told in this passage, she spent all she had on those quack doctors and their remedies, and they were useless. All they had done was drain her bank account dry, and she was penniless and destitute. And after all those years and all those doctors, she is full of sorrow. And she comes to the place where, in a way, she's just living a death sentence. She's not getting better. She will die of what she's got. Life is literally draining away from her little by little. And I have no doubt that in my heart and my mind that she was at the point where she was going to give up. I've tried everything. It's going nowhere. I can't put up with it anymore. I'm going to pack up. I wonder how many people can identify with that. I mean, maybe yours isn't a physical illness. You don't have to be the same illness as hers. You've just got something in your life that is causing you that kind of suffering. And you've just reached the end of your rope. The end of your tether. You don't know what to try next. Filled with suffering, filled with sorrow. See, in a way, this woman is a picture of two types of people. Firstly, she's the type of those people who do not know Jesus Christ, because everyone who's not yet a Christian is actually defiled by a blood disease, one we got from Adam. We got bad blood. That's why we're sinners. It runs in the family. No one's immune from it. We're all sinners, and our condition has plagued us since we've entered the world. And it's not going to get any better through our own means. It's only when we kind of look to Jesus Christ. But we can find that actually our blood can be changed through his, and we can be made whole. All the self-improvement programs, all the religion is not going to help at all. It's faith in Jesus that will change your life. And this poor woman, in a way, is in a sad shape. It's a physical ailment, but are you one of those people who is just lost? Your eternity isn't even sorted out yet. You need to get that sorted. She's also a picture of believers, people who say we're Christians, but we're carrying around a burden. And you've been carrying around that burden that is heavy. And many of God's children, in a way, are just so discouraged and so defeated today. Is that you? You've tried everything to get better. You've tried to handle your problems. You've read all the books. You've been on the websites. You've been to the conferences. You've heard the preachers. You've gone on all of those things. But nothing's changed. Life is just still messed up. Well, if that's you, I want you to keep listening, because what this happened to this woman is going to give you some encouragement if you too would actually reach out to Jesus. Reach out to Jesus. There was a time in my life when I was in ministry, and that actually life was horrid. I have to say this. There was a time when actually I wanted to give up. I wanted to walk away from church life, from Christian ministry. I felt dreadful. I felt no one understood anything that was going on. I lived a kind of isolated life. I felt as though everything was messed up in my life. And yet I put on a brave face and stand in church every week. And kind of, I remember saying to my administrator, Margaret, at the time, I've got to keep the show on the road. That's a terrible thing when a pastor starts saying that. But that's how low I was, and I wanted to give up. And I'd kind of gone to conferences, and I'd gone to people to pray for me, and I'd gone to this, and I'd read that, and I was trying to stir myself up and all sorts of things. And one day, I was alone, pouring my heart out to God. And it wasn't an audible voice, but it was as though God just spoke into my heart. Jesus was there. He kind of tapped me on the shoulder. And he said, am I enough? Am I enough? Well, you can go to the seminars and you can hear all the other preachers and you can read all of their books and all those other things. But what about me? And I wonder, in Christian ministry, I've seen that over and over and over again. Where we try and get help. We want the counselling. We want other people's prayers. We go for this book and that seminar and that workshop and this ministry and whatever. And Jesus is standing and said, what about me? Have we connected and touched base with him? Not with all the things around him. That's what happens in this situation here. You see, this woman not only had that horror, she actually embraced a hope. Somewhere, somehow, verses 27 and 28, she'd heard about Jesus. Maybe she'd heard about the leper who'd been healed. Remember, we did that a few weeks ago. Maybe she'd heard about the madman, the demonic man across the other side of the lake and how he'd been healed. Maybe she just heard the stories of Jesus, but something within her made her think, if I can get to him, it can change. Regardless of where she heard about him, she had come to realize that Jesus was her only hope. And that's the place we all have to get to. When we realize that Jesus is my only hope. She believed with all her heart that if she could just get to him, she would be healed. If she could just touch him, she would be healed. And so as she elbowed her way through that crowd of people, she was taking such a great risk. Here was this unclean woman going through a crowd where she shouldn't have been, pushing people aside. They could have turned on her and kind of humiliated her, even stoned her. But she's taking this risk because she realizes that if I can just get to him, then I can be healed. The risk was worth taking. She was determined because she was desperate. The very nature of her disease had taken all her energy, and maybe she could hardly just drag herself out of bed that day, but she was going to get there one way or another. And I wonder if we've reached the place in our own life where actually we've got to get in touch with Jesus. Oh, come on, I know, I'm just the same as anybody else here in one sense. Oh, I've been forward for prayer and I felt no different. I've been on conferences where everybody else is living a life of victory apparently, and I'm not. You ever been there? And I wonder what it is. Is it because I'm looking for them to solve my problems? And Jesus says, what about me? Am I enough? See, the thing I have learned over the years is that it is always going to come down to this one-on-one moment. Not being part of a crowd or even a small group, but face to face with God. That's where we're going to be ultimately. It's where we need to be now. Jesus is your only hope. If you need salvation and forgiveness and eternal life, Jesus is the only way. You're already a believer, but you feel so burdened with the problems that are going on in your life, relationship problems, financial problems, health problems, whatever they may be. Stop looking for other people to solve it and connect with Jesus Christ, the Son of God. That's the way. He's your only hope. You've been burdened and defeated, and you need to touch him. And the sooner you realize that Jesus is the only hope you have, the sooner you can get to, like that picture, cry out for him, and he'll come. Because he's here. Why carry that burden one more step? Whatever it is. Why fight your battle one more day? You don't need to. Why live a defeated life another day? Why should we do that? When today is the day where we should reconnect with Jesus. Or even connect for the first time. To touch him. Because he can help. That's the hope that she embraced. It's the hope that we need to embrace this morning. And whatever situation you're going through is that you get to that place where you hear the still small voice of Jesus. And he just says, will I do? I've not changed. I've not gone anywhere. I'm still here, the same today and yesterday and forever. How easy it's us who go off and think we've got to try all these other things, isn't it? I'll go to this ministry because they've got the answer. The answer's Jesus. I beg you, do whatever it takes, like this woman going through that crowd, being in a place where she shouldn't be, to reach out to Jesus Christ. Because when she did, she experienced her healing. Her healing was a miracle. It was a powerful experience. When she was near enough, she reached out that trembling hand and just touched his garment. The word touch there literally means to cling to. I'm sure actually she wasn't really clinging to it and kind of like pulling it off, but that's what the word, it was, I am going to get there to get what I need. I'm not going to let go. Was it a couple of weeks ago, did I tell you that story about the man who stood up in the middle of the service? Big rugby player. Right? What's his name, Julia? Can you remember? I always visualise him. He's over here because the church where I was ministering in London, he sat over there. He was giant and he had a little wife like this. Amazing guy. And we always gave this gospel appeal and people coming forward to receive the Lord at the end of the service. He was halfway through the sermon and he just stood up. He says, I want to be saved now. No politeness about it. He's not going to wait till the end of the service. Now. What's it going to take for you to connect with Jesus? I'm going to get through there now. I'm going to risk everything now. You need to run to the altar. She was healed because she went through that. It was powerful. It was personal. As soon as she touches him, Jesus knows what's happened. I mean, for the record, he always knows what's happened, doesn't he? But he knew power had gone out of him. There was no question about that. And so he turns and says, who touched me? I mean, it's kind of like, who touched us in a crowd when we were going out for the fire? Who touched me? Well, there's loads of people. There were dozens of people touching him and bumping into him that day. A fact that was pointed out by the disciples. But her touch was different from all the other touches because it was a touch that was accompanied by faith. Many people touched Jesus, but only one touched him with the finger of faith. Jesus spoke to her and eventually she comes and she falls at his feet. Here's the very reason why she wanted to do it secretly. She didn't want to be brought into public. She didn't want to do anything. She didn't think, what's going to happen now? Maybe she thought she was going to be rejected. Maybe she thinks she's going to be chastised and thrown out. Jesus isn't interested in humiliating her. Not interested in preaching her a sermon. He's not interested in driving her away from his presence. He was interested in helping her with her problem. You notice when we sang that song, Praise is Rising, it says, in your presence. What does it say? My fears fade away. Something like that. Washed away. That's what the presence of Jesus does. Suddenly you're changed. Isn't it? I mean, I don't know how your walk with God is like, but is it just kind of mental things? You just read something and think, oh, well, very nice too. Or actually, do you welcome the presence of the living God? And actually things change. She was in his presence. She came and bowed at his feet and confessed everything. This was the public acknowledgement. Jesus got the response from her in a way that he wanted. And actually now she's unashamed to, she just wants to tell everyone. I want you to notice something, and I know I've pointed out at the beginning, but Jesus was on his way to this young daughter of a man called Jairus. And here this little girl is on the point of death. And as Jesus makes his way to Jairus' house, he's surrounded by this crowd. And in spite of all the seriousness of his mission and the ministry he was about to do for Jairus and his daughter, he takes the time to deal with her. I want to emphasize that because so often, people kind of think, I'm not really that important. I'm not really that special. Oh, I've come for prayer and the prayer team was busy. I'll just wander away again. We don't want that to happen. Everyone is important. Everyone is special. God has time for all of us. We need to make that time. I don't know, for 13 years nearly I've been saying, whoever needs to stay, I'll be the last one to leave if I have to. That's true. We want to serve. We want to help. We want to pray for you. We want to see God touch you. Jesus was there for that woman. She was the center of his attention. And even in a room this crowded, you are the center of God's attention. I was just struck by the words we were singing again. And amazingly, you sing words over and over again, and suddenly it hits you. I forgot which song it was, where it just said about our forgiveness and our forgiving and our failing, coming to God. But then he says, "But I am your desire." I don't know how many of you have felt, I have tripped up and I've failed and I've really ruined it, God. And so you kind of then put yourself down and think, I'm rubbish then, aren't I? And then you get to that another line and it says, "But I realise that I'm your desire." Would you say that I am God's desire? Yeah. I am God's desire. He wants to work in my life. Yes, I've stumbled and fallen and I'm struggling and I've got burdens. But, we lift ourselves up and we see him. Well, we don't lift ourselves up. We just look to him. And we realise I'm God's desire. He wants to touch my life. It was a profound experience for healing. Jesus' words confirmed what she already knew, the things that had happened. He says, "Daughter." Can you imagine that? After 12 years of being an unclean woman, someone embraces her and says, "Daughter." She got more than she bargained for that day. She went just for a physical healing, and she finds out that actually she's embraced and brought into the family of God. Her soul is changed. She's in a different relationship. She's taken in by God, and her faith has brought her into that relationship in that sense. And Jesus says, "Go in peace." That means so important. That means what you've done is the right thing. You came and did this against all odds, against all public opinion and what you should do and all the law and all that. But you've done the right thing in reaching out and touching his garment. Any other man would have been offended